September 4th, 1862, the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia, commanded by General Robert E. Lee, has crossed the Potomac River into Maryland. They have begun spreading up through the countryside, moving towards the area where we're standing today, just south of Frederick, Maryland, then called Fredericktown. This battlefield that we're standing on will be an 1864 battlefield,
Yep.
but in 1862 is going to be the site of a major Confederate encampment and also the site of the trajectory of this Maryland campaign changing. Matt, the date is September 6th, 1862. Confederate forces are arriving on the very grounds we're standing on.
Correct. September 6, 1862, Confederate forces have made it to Monocacy Junction, and they are beginning to camp in the fields around us here. In fact, the corner behind us that is today open field was actually a woodlot during the American Civil War, and it would be in that cool woodlot with the little stream that runs through it, the remains of which are still there today, is where General Robert E. Lee will make his headquarters camp on the night of the 6th. Jackson is going to be nearby. James Longstreet will be nearby. The Confederate Army is concentrating just outside of Frederick, Maryland. And while they are here, we're going to have really the strain of this summer of combat being able to be seen. Not only do we have a wounded Robert E. Lee, who had actually taken a bad fall on the 31st of August, 1862, but on this very day, September 6th, 1862, Jackson will be on a new horse, a horse that had been given to him by a sympathetic individual from the state of Maryland. Little Sorrel had actually gone missing. They were afraid he'd been stolen, and so this new horse had been provided to Jackson, and the horse will rear on him and fall back on
The man himself. The man's body is wrecked.
Yep. So he's in rough shape. And of course, James Longstreet himself has come across the Potomac with a boil on his foot. And so all of the big three for the Confederate High Command are in some form of disrepair.
Hate to break it to a lot of you who have this fancy image of Confederate imagery, nice and high on horses, coming across the river. These three older guys look like three older guys. We have them all in ambulances. We've got broken wrists, sprained wrists, sore bodies, toes and slippers with boils. Like Matt's describing, it is not the scene as you would imagine by the time they get here.
Right. And the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia, much like its counterparts, the Army of the Potomac, now moving out of Washington, D.C., or about to be moving out of Washington, D.C., are also looking rough. Now, of course, we have had resupplies over the summer and things like that, but remember, we are doing a lot of heavy marching during this period, and of course, there'd been all that fighting in August. We've got a lot of Confederate troops out here that are looking definitely worse for wear. On September 6th, with the Army concentrating here, Robert E. Lee is going to run into the first of two major problems he will have in this campaign. We've already touched on it a little bit, and Lee had been aware of the possibility, but we have, of course, Harpers Ferry. Harpers Ferry is a garrisoned town. It has about 12,000 federal troops in it. It is, of course, guarding, or those troops are guarding, the supply depots at the gateway to the Shenandoah Valley. Harpers Ferry is right there at the northern end of the Shenandoah Valley. These resources will be guarded and continue to be guarded by Dixon Miles throughout this campaign. Lee believed when he moved north that the federal garrison at Harpers Ferry would be withdrawn, that they would abandon that position. He had no way of knowing that the garrison was under orders to hold Harpers Ferry to the last. So now we have this large contingent of federal troops that are behind Lee's lines, threatening his lines of communication and supply with the deeper south. So he now must do something about Harpers Ferry. As we mentioned, out there at Urbana, we've had a clash as well, just a little to the east of Urbana, Hyattstown. And due to this, by September 9th, we are going to have Lee notified of the federal pressure that is building on him. We have to remember, Pat, Robert E. Lee believed that he would have 2 to 3 weeks where he could move through Maryland, maybe even up into Pennsylvania, rest, resupply his forces, and prepare to receive a federal advance, basically getting to choose the battlefield of his choice.
Is it fair to say his expectation of McClellan or whoever's going to be commanding the federal force that they are not going to get out of Washington as quickly as they do so?
That is exactly right. Now, Lee believes that if it's McClellan, that it's going to be a slower, more meticulous build of his armies. But as we've been discussing, the Army of the Potomac is actually an amalgamation of forces. McClellan's old command, the Army of the Potomac, the recently defeated Union Army of Virginia, and the Washington garrison merged into one fighting force.
Captain Planet. No.
And pushing out into Western Maryland. This force is very large on paper, but we're going to see as this campaign continues how it will be utilized.